Hello, and welcome back to the Corruptive Chaos channel. I'm your host, Corbin, and today we'll be reviewing the new blockbuster film, Moonfall.
There's no need to panic.
I'm not crazy!
So, Moonfall was directed by Roland Emmerich, disaster artist at this point, and it stars Patrick Wilson, Halle Berry, and John Bradley, among a huge ensemble cast, really, of somewhat disposable characters throughout the film. And the story of the film is that the moon has something wrong with it. It's going out of orbit, and those at NASA don't know why. And you have a conspiracy theory that turns out to be true, sort of, with John Bradley's character studying it with this theory of the megastructure, which is that you have these huge planetoids or moons that were built by aliens billions of years ago to pose as planets or moons, and he believes our own moon to be one of these megastructures. Of course, those at NASA and other professionals exhume him to be a crackpot conspiracy theorist, and Bradley's character, Casey Houseman, tries to get data to prove that the moon has something wrong with it, and that its rocky crust is just a facade, and that underneath it really is some sort of maniacal weapon, likely. And our film begins actually a decade prior from modern day, where Patrick Wilson and Halle Berry and their partner are up in space, and something goes wrong. Patrick Wilson's character sees these phenomena, I guess, coming out of the moon, and it attacks their shuttle ship, while Halle Berry is knocked out on the shuttle.
What the hell is that?
And so we jump time a decade, and Patrick Wilson's character is now disgraced, a disgraced astronaut, while Halle Berry's character is still working at NASA. And we establish that all of our characters have real familial issues, whether it's tension between spouses or former spouses, or parents or children, or the whole lot of all of these sort of one-note things that can develop our characters. I think it should be said that Roland Emmerich is, back at it again with another disaster flick. This is what he's known for. At least, this is an original film, and Roland Emmerich films can either become complete schlock and entertaining and fun, or they have the setting and you want to have stakes. You want to have some gravity to the action that is going on, and it's just completely absurd, and you end up not liking the film because nothing is being taken seriously at all. I think Moonfall rides that line of being complete schlock, where it can be pretty fun. It's very entertaining. I think while I was watching this, I was laughing constantly, and I think you have to go into this with that expectation that this isn't just going to have a few jokey things in it. This is going to be completely absurd, completely ridiculous. If you are a science fiction fan and you're going to see Moonfall because of its sci-fi elements and you want to take those seriously, that's not going to be the case whatsoever. I mean, completely absurd things happen that would never happen with rocketry, or the way the moon changes the gravity of Earth, but it does lend itself to some pretty hilarious moments. And I think if you're sitting there in the theater watching this, you might just be completely out of it, which I mean to be that you aren't taking anything seriously, and that's a detriment to your viewing experience. As for me, I really enjoyed this. I thought it was a comedy at parts, because characters are so two-dimensional. This almost becomes a parody of the usual Roland Emmerich disaster film, even though his characters are usually pretty flat and two-dimensional. They only serve, minute purposes, and the real spectacle is not the acting, it's the special effects, it's the disaster, it's the action, it's those tense, thrilling moments that can also be complete schlock at the same time, which means they could be completely ridiculous, or you're on the edge of your seat also laughing at what's happening up in front of you. A side note would be that usually I probably won't be disclosing how I'm watching these movies. It'll usually be in a theater, I presume, but I typically will see it, on a big screen if available. But this was an interesting case because I actually saw Moonfall in IMAX with a huge screen in front of me, which was a real treat and experience. The sound system in the theater I saw it in was booming, which really lended itself to these absurd moments where you have the score is booming, you have a bunch of sound effects booming, and it just turns into this ridiculous spectacle film that is taking itself almost too seriously, or it's self-aware. I can't really put my finger on Roland Emmerich at this point, whether he is intentionally making these big schlock pieces that are showing absolute catastrophe on planet Earth, or if he's trying to actually craft something with any artistry, really. Because in this, it seems really generically edited. The shots themselves aren't particularly interesting. You do get a lot of really well CGI, but that's not really thanks to Roland Emmerich. That's thanks to the probably thousands of CG artists who worked on this.
We're planning a mission to attack this thing. I'm asking you for your help.
Say yes, Brian.
And so it's hard to know whether he is taking these films seriously. But regardless of that, the viewer really shouldn't, because, as I said, the characters are saying really wild things. And it's interesting seeing such absurd dialogue come out of the mouths of really well-trained actors. I mean, Patrick Wilson and Halle Berry, great performers in plenty of other films. The real standout here is John Bradley as Casey Houseman, who is our conspiracy theorist who is right, which is odd in an era of politics now where we have these kind of wacky conspiracy theories floating around. And yet, in this film, we're sort of making fun of him, even though he's right about these megastructures and the moon. I mean, if you've seen any sort of trailers, you know that something is going up with the moon. And that means that his character, Casey Houseman, ends up being pretty right in the end.
If the moon really is what you think it is, suit up.
So, while I think the entire film is pretty ridiculous, I think there's a clear moment when things just turn into complete absurdity, where your sort of suspension of disbelief should completely drop, and you should just throw all logic out of the window. And that's when our three astronauts, our three main characters, actually get in a old shuttle and they try to fly up to the moon. So you have this scene on the California coast where they're getting this rocket ready to fly up in the air, and there's a huge tsunami coming, and you have no station crew to guide their shuttle on the actual ground. There's just a few people around to help them get this rocket ready. I mean, I imagine at NASA, when they launch a rocket, it takes, hundreds, if not thousands of people to get that scenario ready. Yet, this thing was cobbled together in a few hours, and they, of course, they successfully get up to space. And, that's meant to be a really tense moment, even though that they'll always succeed.
You have got a big gravity wave coming your way. You have to launch now.
Did he say gravity wave?
Trouble on the way. We're underwater, guys.
And the moon is so close to the Earth that's our first instance where the gravity begins to change, and you see people hopping as if they're sort of floating just for a second. this defies gravity in ways that I don't really know. I can't really explain, but I doubt what happens with the moon and its sort of gravitational pull could really happen, or if this did happen, that it would have this same effect. And so beyond that scene, that's when we sort of split between our two groups of characters. On one hand, we have our main trio, who really, that's who I was invested in the entire time. And on the other hand, we have our larger cast of related family members of Patrick Wilson and Halle Berry's characters. You have them going on this sort of road trip mission all the way from that scene that took place on the California coast, and they're trying to get to somewhere in Colorado, a drive that would take, a handful of hours. Yet it's treated as if they went straight from one location to the next, like that, instantaneously nearly.
What's the plan?
Save the moon, save Earth.
Brian, what are you doing?
It's flying itself! Wait for it.
So it's hard to take things seriously throughout the entire movie. I cannot stress that enough. I mean, you're really just watching there with CGI happening, and the spectacle is what you're supposed to be focused on. Throughout this entire time, I guess that sort of lends itself with the ensemble family members to showing the effects of what is happening on the Earth. There is complete destruction happening. You have pieces of the moon falling onto the Earth. You have its gravitational pull causing tectonic plate movements, it says. There's flooding everywhere. I would imagine that every major coast city would be completely wiped out after the events of this film. And I think I want to talk about some bigger spoilers that happen toward the end of the film. So I'll just say here, if you don't care or if you've already seen the film, you can move on to spoilers and a little interesting tidbits that I have to say. Otherwise, my recommendation is that you should go see this. This was a really fun time. The movie is really schlocky. I do admit that this really lends itself to my personal tastes in areas of what I want from a big popcorn blockbuster film. It's completely ridiculous. It's just a fun time that you can have at the theater. I think a lot of modern blockbusters take themselves just too seriously to where, I think that they should be slightly more ridiculous or have a more campy or ridiculous tone to them. So here, this is complete camp and schlock and ridiculousness, whatever label you want to put on it. It checks all of those boxes. And, does it matter to me that the sci-fi is so out there and that it completely defies logic? Not really. I think that could be a selling point on whether someone likes or dislikes the film. But for me personally, I would recommend it. And my rating would be 3.5 out of 5 stars. Take that with what you will. So here's where I will talk about spoilers briefly. And one side note that sort of deals with what I was thinking is another film, which would be Brian De Palma's Mission to Mars. I think there are some elements that happen in the third act of Mission to Mars that resemble the third act of Moonfall. So in the end, it's revealed that aliens did not build this megastructure of a moon that we have floating and orbiting Earth. Instead, it was ancestors of the human race that lived in a faraway galaxy and who sent this megastructure. Of course, only one survived, I guess, because AI turned against humanity.
That's crazy.
And the AI really is manifested into these nanobots, and they proceed to turn into this giant creature, or multiple creatures, and they wreak havoc on this old ancient human society on a planet and build structures far away, billions of years in the past. So these nanobot creatures, I guess one reminded me of Mission to Mars because They sort of resemble the twisters that occur in De Palma's Mission to Mars that happen on the surface of the red planet in that film. Where, you know, they're just these huge, like, arm-like creatures. In that film, they are like twisters that occur on Earth, where they're sucking up objects and people. Whereas in this, you know, they sort of act like a robotic arm that can move out and forth and just sort of roam around in space freely.
Let's go, you son of a...
And another reason this reminded me of Mission to Mars was because of the expository scene that we get with a human character who is sort of finding out all of this information from an outside source. So in Mission to Mars, it is an alien giving these characters a ton of expository dialogue about the history of humanity and its growth throughout the years, throughout the billions of years.
For centuries, we've searched for the origin of life on Earth. We've been looking on the wrong planet.
And the same thing happens, in a sense, with Moonfall, because Patrick Wilson's character is getting all of this expository information and sort of flashback sequence from an AI that was programmed into this megastructure that I guess runs the megastructure. There are no living humans left. There are none that survived in the megastructure, but it was able to bring forth ancient human DNA that eventually went from the moon onto Earth, which grew up our own civilization. So, you know, this is kind of a screw you to creationism and evolutionism in a way. It kind of pokes fun at both, I guess. And, you know, we get this expository scene in a pretty bland way, actually. That was kind of a lull in the third act for me, where we're just in this completely whitewashed room. Patrick Wilson was probably just standing in front of a green screen, and he was getting all this info from nothing because it's just this AI, which is probably a CG creation in itself. And then he has this mission, and he understands what needs to be done to save the Earth, and that Earth needs to be saved, and it can be done. Another film that a part reminded me of that happened soon after, where John Bradley's character decides to sacrifice himself instead of Patrick Wilson's character, who was going to. It kind of reminded me of Star Trek, Wrath of Khan, actually, where, you know, Patrick Wilson and John Bradley are on one side of a piece of glass, and it reminded me of Spock and Kirk in the Wrath of Khan, where Spock sacrifices himself. You know, it had that moment where they're almost touching hands on either side of the glass, which was a fun moment. You know, that's when it's supposed to have some emotional weight.
I have been, and always shall be, your friend. Live long and prosper.
And so, yeah, like I said, John Bradley's character sacrifices himself, and Halle Berry and Patrick Wilson are able to fall back onto planet Earth. They're able to do it quickly because I guess the moon is still very close to the planet. And where do they land, of all places? They land very close to their family members, our second group that we have been following for the second and third acts of the film. They land in Colorado, snowy Colorado, and they're instantly picked up by a helicopter and then transported to have a nice, happy ending where they get to hug out their family members and rejoice in how they saved the day, even though massive catastrophe did happen. It was not avoided. You know, a lot of the coastal cities would have been completely wiped out. Tectonic plate movements would have happened. Volcanoes would have erupted. I mean, so many catastrophes would have happened. Who knows the amount of human lives that were lost. And yet, you know, you got the musical score really swelling in the end to make you feel like, wow, these characters did something great. And really, they did. I mean, they saved the moon from crashing into the Earth. At the end of the day, catastrophe was not avoided. So that'll be about it. That was all I had to say for spoilers. It reminded me of a couple other films, and it talked about, you know, who created humanity, and it got into that. I also wanted to give a special mention to Donald Sutherland's character, who is just this old curmudgeon-y doctor in some government lab. He's only in one scene, which is a real shame. It's great to see such an old classic actor like that in a big tentpole film like this.
You knew all this was happening before NASA.
You're the unidentified source?
Oh, yes.
You know, Donald Sutherland, great in the remake of Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
How do you know my name? I didn't tell you my name.
And here he's just in like a wheelchair, and he's like warning Halle Berry's character to get out. He has a really funny moment that maybe was not intentional. But with that all said, that'll be my review. Thanks for watching, everyone. As I said, I would recommend this, and my rating was a 3.5 out of 5 stars. And you know, you can disagree. Tell me what you think in the comments. Let me know. And stay tuned for more reviews from me in the future.
If you're watching this, then you know by now a huge problem is heading our way. An emergency meeting is being called at our usual place immediately. Free bagels.